After the Warriors and Nets game, the game that happened was the Clippers versus the Lakers. It was the last game of the doubleheader. And the Clippers pretty much had firm control of this game throughout the game. The Lakers made a late comeback, but then the Clippers made a late push to further the lead even more, thanks to Paul George. Paul George had 33 points, 13 for 18, 5 from 8 from the three, 6 rebounds, and 3 assists. Ibaka made his debut. He chipped in 15 points, 2 for 3 from the three. And Kawhi didn't have his best game. He shot 10 for 26, 1 for 8 from the three, but he still had 26 points. So after watching the game, everybody, of course, there's two people. There's two types of people. There's the people that are saying that it's just a regular season game and who cares, because at the end of the day, the Lakers won a championship. And there's the other side of people that are really impressed by this win. They see potential in this Clippers team. So just for you, what do you think is the key for the Clippers to have success this season? And by success, we all mean winning a championship or at least getting to the Western Conference Finals.
Well, it's going to come down to the two guys that everybody's been talking about, Paul George and Kawhi. And that's what it came down to last year. I feel like they could have easily closed out that Nuggets series if those two guys would have performed in games, 5, 6, 7. But it just seemed like they could never put it together, get on the same page, and close it out. And had they gone into a series with the Lakers with those two guys playing at their best, it would have been a great series. But it just comes down to, can they do what they have to do? Last night, Paul George was lights out, especially in the second half. He got off to a bit of a slow start, but in the second half, he literally showed he was one of the top dogs in the NBA, and that's the player we know he can be. He played at an MVP level in Oklahoma City. Everybody likes to laugh at it, but he did, and he was that same guy in Indiana too, so we know he has it in him. But since coming to LA, it's just been hit or miss with him. You just don't know what you're going to get on a given night. So can he do what he did last night in the second half consistently? If he can, and Kawhi, even though he had an off night last night, he was still pretty solid. If him and Kawhi can have a performance like they did last night consistently, even if it's just one of the two of them being on, I think they'll be a force to be reckoned with in the West. But the problem is if they don't, you saw they had a little lull in the second quarter and beginning of the third quarter where neither of those two were stepping up, and they were getting destroyed by the Lakers, and the Lakers weren't even playing that well.
For me, I think there are two keys for the Clippers to go far this year. I think it's one, like you said, Paul George. Paul George has to play like a star or superstar caliber player. He needs to play like a top 10 player. Simple as that. And not just in the regular season, in the playoffs. He needs to play like a top 10 player in the playoffs. The second key to their success, I think, is getting a point guard. I still think that they need a point guard. Two guys that I think they could possibly get is Derrick Rose. His name has been floating around for about a year to go to the Clippers or Lakers now, just to get traded out of Detroit, to be honest. They should be going full out and fire selling their team at the deadline because, what else are they going to do? And I think another player that could possibly go to the Clippers is George Hill in Oklahoma City. They don't need him for the whole year. They're probably going to ship him off by the deadline. And I think the Clippers should go out and get George Hill. He's a 44% three-point shooter. He can run the team well. And what a scenario would it be that the player that the Spurs traded to draft Kawhi now is going to be teaming up with Kawhi in the Clippers. I think it would be a cool scenario. But they need a point guard. And I think that's the reason why they started Nicholas Batum. Because Nicholas Batum isn't the player that he once was, but what Nicholas Batum reminds me of, and this may be a little bit of a stretch because in his prime he was a very good player, but I think Nicholas Batum fills in that Hedo Turkoglu role that he had with the Magic back in the 2010s teams. But even though he's not as great as a shooter, Batum is a kind of a streaky shooter, even though he could hit it. But Batum's going to rebound. He's going to get assists. He has the potential to run the offense. He's a point forward.
Yeah.
He's not worried about the stats. In Charlotte, it was a weird fit because you're paying him star money and you're asking him to score 20 points a game when his game is more 9, 5, and 5.
Yeah.
So in the Clippers, now he can play within the offense. He can just do everything. He's like a great value Draymond, He just does everything.
Yeah, and he's been looked down upon because of that contract that he got in Charlotte. Everybody kind of had this idea of him because of what he was getting paid, and the output didn't match that. But he is not a bad player by any stretch, and he was their best playmaker on the floor last night, setting guys up. He had 6 assists, which led the team, and it's a glaring weakness. And it was a glaring weakness coming into this offseason, and the fact that they didn't fill that was very surprising to me, especially after their star players were coming out and talking about how they lacked a playmaker. It was pretty weird that they didn't go out and get one, but like you said, there's going to be playmakers on the market throughout this season. You mentioned 2 of them, and I'm sure there will be others. It would be malpractice if they didn't go out and get one because they need it.
Yeah, Patrick Beverley is more of a pest, defender, a spot-up shooter. He worked well with James Harden because James Harden was the true point guard of that team. Pat Bev was more of the shooting guard, and he would just kind of feed off of what other guys did. But he's not a playmaker. So I don't know how they're going to get a point guard. They're probably going to have to trade one of their key players like Lou Will or maybe even Pat Bev. It's going to be tough, but they got to get a point guard, and I think that's what's going to be the key to their success because when you look at this team, if you have a lineup of Batum, Kawhi, George, and Ibaka, which was their starting lineup basically yesterday, I mean, Batum, Kawhi, and George can switch on anybody. Yeah. They're very good defenders. We know Paul George and Kawhi are elite defenders. I say Batum is a very, very good defender. And Ibaka, he's versatile too, and he's a good shot blocker. And he just fits their team so much better than Harrell because he could step out and he could shoot shots. We saw him yesterday, 2 for 3 from the 3. And in Toronto, he was a very good three-point shooter. Yeah. And that's what they needed because Harrell provided none of that spacing.
He looked great last night too, a perfect fit. And you mentioned all the reasons why he's a better fit than Harrell. Even if Harrell might be considered the better player, maybe.
I don't think so.
I think that Ibaka is a much better fit for this team. He provides some spacing and also interior defense, which killed them last year against the Nuggets because they couldn't guard Nikola Jokic to save their life. And then when they started throwing the doubles, that was when Jokic picked them apart, and it killed them for the last 3 games of the series. So now adding in Ibaka not only gives you a different dynamic offensively, but changes the way you're going to defend teams with elite big men too.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. So I think the Clippers definitely got better, but it's just that one point guard role that they really need. And I think Batum can do a pretty good job at it for spurts in the game, but I don't think he can be that consistent playmaker. If you have a true point guard with Batum out there, I think that's a team that can be really good because, like I said, Batum is not a bad player. He's more of a 9-5-5 guy, 9-6-6 guy. He's going to get his assists and rebounds. He's a good playmaker. He has high basketball IQ. They just need another guy to be alongside him and be that true point guard.
Yeah.
And how they're going to do it, I'm not sure. They're going to probably have to pull something off. We know Jerry West is a mastermind in that, so we'll see what they do. But I think their keys to their success this season are Paul George playing at a star level and ultimately just getting a point guard.
Yeah, and it's going to take a full season out of Paul George and Kawhi because I don't love their depth either. They had 4 guys come off the bench last night and play 20 minutes. Patrick Patterson, Zubac, Lou Williams, and Luke Kennard. And beyond that, I don't see anybody else that's going to come in and make an impact. Kabengele, Reggie Jackson, who only played 3 minutes, Terrence Mann, Amir Coffey. I don't think any of those guys are going to come in and give you meaningful minutes. So it's going to take those guys being on every night, not taking those superstar rest nights. And that's what it's going to take to have a good season because they don't have that Nets-type depth off the bench where they could take a night off. Those guys are going to have to be on for, 71 games I think they're playing this season? 72. So it's going to take a full season out of those 2 guys. And if they can get that, they'll be a top team in the West.